Prologue. A woman rides through the monsoon rain, grieving the loss of her home and flowers. She reflects on the recent deaths, including her father, killed by the yaksa, a deadly, flower-haired enemy. Despite the rain, she dislikes being in a chariot and continues on horseback. She arrives at a monastery, where a priest leads her to a black lake. She thinks of her sons, especially her eldest, Sikander, who promised to meet her with news. Kneeling by the lake, she prays for answers, but initially sees nothing. Then, a flicker of fire emerges from the water, offering her a powerful answer. The fire speaks, and she accepts its guidance without hesitation. The priest, unaware of the vision, asks if the Nameless spoke, and she responds, knowing the key to defeating the yaksa. I know how to kill the yaksa. In Chapter 1, Priya kneels at the base of the Ahiranya following the yaksa's orders. She reflects on her journey and her obedience. A ghostly figure resembling her childhood temple brother, Nandi, appears, followed by another yaksa wearing Ashok's face. They lead her to a dark tunnel where she encounters the yaksa elders. They tell her she is home, but Priya is unsure of her place. They probe her soul, questioning her loyalty and ability to serve them. As Priya struggles with the guilt of stabbing Malini and abandoning her, the yaksa question her dedication. She demands answers about Bhumika's safety, and the yaksa reveal Bhumika ran from her purpose. Priya, weary and broken, offers herself in service to the yaksa for the war to come. The yaksa agree, allowing her to leave, though she remains uncertain of her future. She prepares for the role the yaksa have set for her. In Chapter 2, Malini is haunted by dreams of Priya, where she repeatedly relives the betrayal of being stabbed. Waking with pain, she confronts the scars from the knife, a reminder of Priya's absence. On the day of Aditya's funeral, Malini prepares herself for the rituals, her body and heart heavy with grief. The funeral is grand, with public mourning and prayers, unlike the swift, undignified burial of Chandra. Aditya's sacrifice for her empire is celebrated, and his death has solidified her power, although Malini is plagued by fragmented memories of him. As she kneels before the pyre, she struggles with the overwhelming scent of flowers, feeling disconnected from the grief around her. After the prayers, Lada and Razia help her stand, and Malini walks to the veranda, realizing her title as Empress is now inextricable from the sacrifices made, her ribs still burning from the past. In Chapter 3, Rao is immersed in the looming possibility of war, triggered by the Ahiranya's assassination attempt on Empress Malini. Despite his inner turmoil and grief over Aditya's death, Rao listens to discussions about vengeance and the yaksa's return. The soldiers around him are tense, fearful of the Ahiranya and the deadly forests. Rao reflects on Priya's sacrifice, which saved Malini's throne, but ended with her stabbing the Empress. After an emotionally exhausting funeral, Rao isolates himself, drinking heavily in an attempt to numb his grief. Lada eventually finds him and talks about Malini's distraction due to Aditya's death. Later, Rao visits Seema, who is under his protection. Despite the tension between them, Seema acknowledges the choices made, and Rao promises to make her imprisonment more bearable. As he struggles to remain coherent, he has a vision of Aditya, sensing an inevitable future, and is shaken by a realization that his own eyes have changed. In Chapter 4, Bhumika is feverish and weak, drifting between consciousness and delirium. She is cared for by a man named Jeevan who claims to be her husband but is not. As she recovers, she is surrounded by a group of mysterious water-veiled figures who offer her water, knowing it will give her crucial knowledge. She refrains from drinking, sensing the weight of the knowledge it might bring. Jivan reveals her name is Bhumika, though she feels disconnected from it. The next morning, Bhumika is treated with kindness by a helper who expresses sympathy for her loss. Despite this, Bhumika is determined to continue her journey. She recalls an image of a holy lake where a seeker once learned how to defeat the yaksa. She resolves to head toward Alor, where she believes the answers and power to end the war lie. In Chapter 5, Priya returns to the Mahal, feeling the presence of the yaksa within her. She is aware of the destruction around her, the Mahal now enmeshed with the green, the living trees replacing the stone pillars. As she walks through the hallways, she encounters Kritika, who is overjoyed to see her, calling her an elder, and she is fed by Bilu and the others. The household, now a mix of people and pilgrims, is uncertain about Priya's transformation, but Kritika believes in her leadership. Priya confesses to having stabbed Malini but doesn't know her fate. She inquires about Padma and Rukh, learning that they are safe. Priya is overwhelmed by the weight of her changes and the role the yaksa have made her play. As Rook opens up about his struggle, Priya resolves to protect Ahiranya despite the loss of her past and love. In Chapter 6, Malini is advised by Lada against going to war with Ahiranya, warning that it could risk the Empire's survival and loyalty of allies. Malini disagrees, believing that the threat from Ahiranya is inevitable and must be confronted. She plans to use fire as a weapon to protect Parijatdvipa, confident it will either eliminate the threat or allow them to prepare for another way to win. Malini's grief over Aditya is suppressed, and she focuses on her leadership duties, overseeing a private execution of traitors. She ensures a clean and private death for them, contrasting her methods with her brother Chandra's brutality. Afterwards, she meets a priest in the prison who challenges her belief in her fate. Malini demands his loyalty, offering him a chance to serve in the upcoming war against the yaksa. Lada expresses concern, but Malini is resolute in her course of action. In Chapter 7, Priya focuses on strengthening Ahiranya's defenses and reshaping the Mahal with her power, though she struggles with inner grief and the inability to connect with Maniara. Despite her thrice-born strength, she feels the weight of her responsibilities as the High Elder and faces criticism from Kritika, who pressures her to lead. Priya tries to balance leadership tasks and her internal turmoil, but her connection to the yaksa remains elusive. Eventually, she receives a letter from Bhumika, revealing her absence and leaving Priya with unresolved grief. As Priya seeks further strength, she turns to the yaksa, asking for guidance. She receives a powerful mask, once worn by Bhumika, and is reminded of the yaksa's dominance and her role as their chosen vessel. The yaksa hints at the power of Rot to defeat the Parijatdvipans, leaving Priya with a grim understanding of her path. In Chapter 8, Sanvi approaches a priest at her local shrine, seeking a place to serve the Empress and the Mothers of Flame. She reveals her faith and desire to die for a purpose, expressing interest in joining the Empress's guard. The priest, initially wary, questions her intentions and faith, but she convinces him of her loyalty. Sanvi is determined to prove her worth, offering a coin as a token of commitment. She returns the following evening, hoping for a response. The priest, Mitul, awaits her, and they agree to move forward with her service. Sanvi is now poised to take on a new role, driven by devotion to the mothers and a desire for purpose. In Chapter 9, Malini visits her sister-in-law, Varsha, who is grieving Chandra's death and pregnant with his child. Malini offers Varsha protection and assures her that she will be safe while Malini goes to war in Ahiranya. As Malini leaves, she reflects on the power dynamics between them and the challenges ahead. Later, Malini meets Lord Mahesh, who has returned from his duties in Saketa. He pledges his loyalty to her after realizing the truth about Aditya's death. Malini prepares for the upcoming battle, knowing the power of the fire and the importance of her army. Despite her cold resolve, she reflects on the difficulty of facing Ahiranya and Priya. Malini is determined to use every weapon, including the remaining fire, to achieve victory. In Chapter 10, Priya prepares for the impending battle as Parijatdvipan soldiers approach Ahiranya. She ensures that Rook and Padma remain undisturbed by the events, reflecting on her own changes since Malini's betrayal. Priya dons the crown mask, connecting with the green magic of Ahiranya, but struggles with the pain and transformation she has undergone. After meditating in the Harana, she emerges to find her followers ready for battle. Ganam acknowledges her power and the reliance on her abilities rather than weaponry. Priya senses the approaching Parijatdvipan soldiers, and amid her anger and fear, realizes that Malini is leading them. Despite her inner turmoil and the horror of facing Malini, Priya braces for the conflict that will pit them against each other. She steels herself for what's to come. Knowing Malini's arrival signals the beginning of a violent clash. In Chapter 11, Malini leads her army into Ahiranya, sensing both unease and a strange pull toward the forest. As they approach, her soldiers fall into traps, and the true peril of the land becomes clear. Despite the risks, Malini orders her forces forward, determined to face the forest's power. She senses a deep connection to it, a strange compulsion, as she steps into the dark, where her saber ignites with stolen fire. The flames fail to destroy the forest entirely, but they begin the assault. Malini, deeply affected by the encounter, reflects on her connection to Priya, the pain she feels from her betrayal, and the fierce rage that drives her to destroy Ahiranya. With her generals and soldiers engaged in the battle, she watches the forest burn. realizing that the fire alone won't be enough to defeat the yaksa or Ahiranya's power. In Chapter 12, Araliara, a yaksa, watches as the Parijatdvipan army assaults Ahiranya. He and his kin are unfazed by the fire, feeling immense power in the forest as it burns. Araliara reflects on Priya's growth and transformation into a powerful figure under Maniara's influence, feeling both anger and pity for her weakness. As the Parijatdvipans advance, Arali senses Priya's pain and hurries to her side, finding her unconscious but unharmed. Though he recognizes her fragility, he believes she must be taught to embrace her true strength. With a sense of duty, he leaves her, intending to fight the Parijatdvipans and kill some to hang as trophies on the trees, showing his kin's fury. Arali's actions highlight his commitment to both his kin and to ensuring Priya fully becomes what Maniara intends her to be. In Chapter 13, Malini's forces move to the back of the army, surrounded by defenses. Despite her injuries and the protests of her generals, she asserts her decision to lead from the front, testing the fire's strength against Ahiranya. In a dream, Malini confronts Priya, imagining she could kill her for their past conflict, but Priya's sorrowful words evoke confusion and anger in Malini. When she wakes, Razia and Lada express concerns over her recklessness, but Malini defends her actions, citing the necessity of calculated risks in this abnormal war. As Malini prepares for a council meeting, a soldier arrives with disturbing news. Parijatdvipan soldiers have been impaled by living trees in Ahiranya, with bodies growing strange vegetation. Malini sees the horrific transformation herself, realizing Ahiranya's regenerative power. To defeat the forest and save Parijatdvipa, Malini must find new, more effective weapons. In Chapter 14, Bhumika and Jivan continue their journey through harsh conditions, sharing meals and guarding each other at night. Bhumika, aware of her own estrangement from the yaksa, feels a deep connection to the land, yet struggles with a profound grief and loss she cannot fully comprehend. She helps keep watch, but Jivan insists on protecting her. When they encounter a family near a river, Bhumika is overcome with grief, realizing a deep connection to something she left behind. She faces this internal pain, while Jivan supports her in silence, even offering her solace. Later, she asks him why he protects her, and he admits that she once gave his life purpose. While she realizes there's a wound within her, she tries to keep moving forward. Their shared journey continues as Bhumika presses on, her knowledge and grief driving her forward as Jivan remains steadfast by her side. In Chapter 15, Priya awakens in the Sangam and speaks with Maniara, who offers her power, but Priya is shaken by the realization that the yaksa care little for the lives of Ahiranya's people. Maniara suggests Priya grow stronger and more empty to harness her power. After Priya collapses, she senses the presence of new, rotting trees filled with Parijatdvipan soldiers' bodies, and the sense of decay overwhelms her. She meets Ganam, who offers her comfort despite her guilt for not being strong enough. Priya confesses to him that she saw Maniara and learned the yaksa's indifference toward their people's survival. Despite the yaksa's apathy, Priya resolves to use her newfound power to protect Ahiranya, determined to do whatever it takes, even at the risk of her own life. Ganam, cautiously hopeful, listens as Priya vows to fight for her people. In Chapter 16, Malini returns to Parijat to celebrations, but the war against Ahiranya continues. She addresses her court, stressing the need to protect the empire's food and fields from the spreading rot, which threatens their survival. Malini speaks to her advisors, including Lata, about organizing resources, but faces objections from lords about the scarcity of men. Later, Malini visits the imperial temple, where she speaks with Hemant, the high priest. He suggests she may have to sacrifice herself as her brother did, but Malini is determined to find another way to fight the yaksa. She sends Rao on a mission to seek alternative methods to combat them, hoping he will return with answers. Meanwhile, Malini's complex relationship with Rao continues as she trusts him despite his emotional turmoil and concerns about a prisoner Seema under his care. In Chapter 17, Rao struggles with his grief and loss of faith after the death of Aditya. He is torn between staying to fight in the war or returning home to Alor, but Malini's orders take him to Dwarali. Rao reflects on his past, including his loss of faith in the nameless god and his deep sorrow. After drinking heavily, he visits Seema's room, still conflicted about his emotions. Seema, frustrated and emotional, reveals her pain and expresses her desire to leave Harsinghar. Rao offers her a way out, suggesting they go to Dwarali together. Seema, tearful and resolved, agrees to go with him, seeing no other option for survival. Rao promises her a future where she will live. Their shared journey to Dwarali begins, offering a potential escape from the turmoil and loss in Harsinghar. In Chapter 18, Priya dreams of Malini, and when she wakes, a mask keeper informs her of rot-riven strangers seeking refuge near the forest's edge. These outsiders, mostly Parijatdvipans, are fleeing persecution, having been rejected by their own people. Despite the danger of allowing them into Ahiranya, Priya decides to help them. She consults with the yaksa, including Sendil, who initially opposes her decision. However, Priya, empowered by Maniara's influence, asserts her authority and allows the strangers to enter Ahiranya, giving them a place to stay if they are loyal to the yaksa. The moment marks Priya's growing power and leadership as she uses Maniara's strength to make decisions that defy the yaksa's commands. The chapter highlights Priya's inner conflict, her growing strength, and the price of loyalty to the yaksa. In Chapter 19, Bhumika and Jivan arrive at a caravanserai, seeking refuge as their food supplies dwindle. They face suspicion from guards, but manage to pass by using a fabricated story. At the caravanserai, Bhumika is drawn to a lake covered in blue lotus flowers, where a vendor warns her of dangerous old stories related to the water. After Jivan returns with food, they decide to leave but sense they are being followed. 4 men approach with weapons, demanding their food. Bhumika uses her knowledge of combat to distract the attackers, allowing Jivan to fight back. The confrontation ends with Bhumika killing one of the men to protect them. After the battle, Bhumika tends to Jivan's wounds, and they quickly leave the area, having narrowly escaped danger. The chapter highlights Bhumika's growing resourcefulness, strength, and the bond between her and Jivan. In Chapter 20, Arali Ara finds Taru Ara, who is suffering from a painful wound caused by the Parijatdvipan's flames. Taru confesses that the remnants of Sanjana's essence are poisoning her, and she struggles with the pain. Arali Ara attempts to ease her suffering, but reflects on his own connection to mortality, realizing how different he is from his kin. He contemplates the loss of Bhumika, acknowledging her value as a temple child, and laments his role in her departure. Leaving his kin behind, Arali Ara moves through the city, spreading rot. He encounters a child, sensing strength in her, and takes her away from her mother, declaring the child belongs to the yaksa. This chapter underscores Arali's internal conflict, his relationship with mortality, and his growing resolve to reshape the future of the yaksa by claiming new temple children. In Chapter 21, Priya faces opposition from Kritika over allowing outsiders, specifically Parijatdvipans, into Ahiranya. Despite Kritika's distrust, Priya defends her decision, acknowledging the newcomer's desperation. When Rook arrives with alarming news of children being brought by a yaksa, Priya rushes to confront the yaksa with Ashok's face. She questions the yaksa's decision to bring children to Ahiranya, asserting her right to raise them as temple elders, despite the yaksa's claim that only he can shape them. The yaksa challenges Priya, demanding she name him to prove her connection to Maniara. Priya succeeds in naming him Arali Ara, and earns the right to care for the children. However, Arali Ara warns her that her loved ones are vulnerable to his kin's cruelty. Priya is left grappling with the grim reality of her power, and the threat to those she cares about. In Chapter 22, Malini waits anxiously through the night for news of Varsha's childbirth. When Sahar informs her that Varsha has safely delivered a healthy son, Malini feels conflicted. A son ensures the continuation of the royal line and solidifies her position, but it also increases the potential for power struggles. She visits the birthing room, where Varsha, weakened and exhausted, holds her newborn son. Malini acknowledges the prince's royal status and reassures Varsha that the proper rites will be performed, though the tension in the room is palpable. Malini contemplates taking the child as her own to prevent any future threats, but she refrains, choosing instead to let Varsha raise him. Despite the political implications, Malini wishes Varsha and her son well, making a conscious decision not to replicate the cruelty of her late brother Chandra. In Chapter 23, Priya meets the children brought to her by the yaksa, with Rukh keeping watch over them. Priya learns their stories and the conditions under which they were brought to the temple. Some of them are highborn, while others are children of those spared by the yaksa for loyalty. Priya gives them her protection, assuring them that they are family and prepares to keep them close. After arranging a place for them to sleep, Priya seeks to connect with Maniara, invoking her power. During this, Araliara appears. He acknowledges Priya's claim to the children, but also reminds her of the brutal training they will endure to become temple elders. Priya reflects on her own painful past under the yaksa's tutelage. As Arali leaves, Priya recognizes that the children are now hers to care for, but they still belong to the yaksa in some way. In chapter 24, Bhumika and Jivan continue their journey and are offered a ride by a man driving an ox-drawn cart. They converse with the man, but Bhumika carefully maneuvers the conversation, eventually softening the man's demeanor. After a meal provided by the man, they reach the Nimisa monastery, where Bhumika seeks the head priest, claiming to have a way to kill the yaksa. The priest, dismissive and unresponsive, rejects her plea. Despite the rejection, Bhumika persists, appealing to the priest's faith and knowledge. She offers a deep, passionate plea, but is ultimately dismissed. In the aftermath, Bhumika feels powerless and defeated, but Jivan reassures her, encouraging her to continue sharing her knowledge. As they travel, they encounter a woman, Gulnar, and her grandchildren struggling with the floodwaters. Bhumika helps them cross a precarious bridge, where Jivan's unwavering support strengthens her resolve. In chapter 25, Priya is ill with fever, a result of her growing power linked to Maniara's magic. Rook takes care of her, ensuring she stays hydrated and fed. While resting, Priya dreams of Malini, feeling her power surge, and discovers new paths forming in the world. Priya realizes that these paths are shaped by Maniara, and the yaksa are using her to create them. When mask keepers find her, Priya reassures them, but the vision of her new role as Maniara's hands overwhelms her. She walks into the forest and encounters Channi, a yaksa, who reveals that the yaksa are returning. The yaksa press a lotus into Priya's hand, symbolizing their plan to awaken another yaksa in Shrugna. Priya realizes her duty to guide this yaksa's rebirth. She later informs Ganam that they must prepare for the coming of this new yaksa, signaling a shift in their plans. In chapter 26, Rao struggles with a persistent headache and grief during his journey to Dwarali, where he is seeking to recover. He finds solace in isolation, but Seema unexpectedly visits his tent and begins a quiet companionship with him. They bond over shared moments, including playing Katur. Upon arrival in Dwarali, Rao is welcomed by the ancient sultan and attends a feast, where he reflects on the politics of the region and his task to recover a mysterious, possibly magical ruby. He shares the tale of the ruby with Seema, who becomes intrigued by it. Seema eventually agrees to accompany him to the Lal Kila, suggesting that they seek adventure in the quest. They arrive at the imposing Lal Kila, where they are greeted by Lady Asma, ready to continue their journey with new purpose. In chapter 27, Malini receives troubling news from a writer about strange, unexplained paths near the Sakadan border, which seem to defy time. Other writers bring similar reports, including one from Shrugna, where these paths are spreading and rot is rampant. Malini, recognizing the danger, decides to travel to Shrugna to investigate and offer aid, bringing Lord Prakash, Lord Narayan, and Low Prince Ashutosh along. She reassures Lada, who worries for her safety, and prepares for the journey while reflecting on her disturbing dreams about Priya and the power that might help her. In private, Malini touches the yaksa's arm on its plinth, feeling an overwhelming rush of power. The arm responds to her touch, and Malini realizes her connection to the yaksa's magic, laughing in a moment of triumph. She understands the path she must follow, filled with newfound energy. In chapter 28, Varsha continues to care for her son Vijay, who is comforted by sunlight and oil lamps. She takes him around the Mahal, enjoying her newfound freedom under the Empress's rule. One of Vijay's favorite spots is the Imperial Temple Garden, where she meets a priest who praises her son and offers a blessing. During the blessing, the priest subtly informs her that the Empress will die and that Varsha must ally with the priesthood for her son's future. The priesthood views the Empress as an obstacle to their power and wants Varsha's support. Struggling with her options, Varsha reflects on the priest's words. The next day, she meets the priest again, bowing to him in subservience. The priest, Mittal, reveals that the high priest only seeks information from her, marking the beginning of her reluctant involvement with their plans. In chapter 29, Lady Asma keeps a watchful eye on Prince Rao, attempting to entertain and care for him, but Rao finds her efforts stifling. He spends his days in the library, where his thoughts wander to a vision from the Nameless. When he shares a conversation with Seema about a vision and the tale of a ruby, she agrees to join him on his journey. They sneak out of the Lalchila, braving a snowstorm. As they struggle through the harsh conditions, Rao reflects on his grief for Aditya. Seema shares her own feelings, and the two bond in the cold. They encounter a group of people in the snow, and Rao announces his identity, shouting of his vision. A man named Ehsan, a Kai of the Yagatai, approaches and assures Rao that he is safe with them. In Chapter 30, Priya watches the temple children train, trying to prepare them for the journey through the deathless waters. As they struggle, Priya's thoughts turn to the ceremony ahead, where the mask keepers will become twice born. She shares a quiet, reassuring moment with Kritika, who expresses hope that they will save Ahiranya together. The ceremony takes place with the children in white, chanting mantras as the yaksa open the way. However, only a few survive the journey. Kritika and Ganam are among the few who emerge alive. Priya is devastated by the loss, but the yaksa argue about their failures. Priya, grieving, prepares the bodies for burial, seeking solace in the act. She is reminded of the loss of Bhumika and her responsibility. In a tense moment, Priya suggests using the children to train future temple elders, gaining approval from the yaksa, though at great personal cost. In Chapter 31, Malini's journey to Srugna reveals the growing rot in the land, and despite efforts from her army, it continues to spread. The soldiers report strange occurrences, including eerie sounds from the trees. Malini practices her combat skills while dreams of Priya persist, signaling their approaching convergence. When Malini and her army arrive at a haveli in Srugna, they learn of a fire in a nearby village. Upon investigation, they find a large pyre burning rot-riven people, led by Lord Rohit, who defends his actions by claiming the victims were criminals. Malini is horrified to realize her orders were misinterpreted, resulting in these deaths. She stops the executions and decides to free the survivors. The conversation shifts to using the fire for war, and Malini reflects on the ethical cost of such actions. She spends a troubled night in prayer, questioning her decisions and the path she must take. In Chapter 32, Rao wakes in a snowstorm, injured and disoriented, and is taken in by Kai Ehsan and his tribe, the Jagatai. Ehsan offers Rao and Seema shelter and care. After regaining his strength, Rao speaks with Ehsan, revealing that he is searching for a ruby, guided by a vision from the nameless god. Ehsan, seeking knowledge of the empire and its threats, asks Rao for information about Malini and the dangers facing Parijatdvipa. Ehsan offers Rao the heart's shell, a powerful artifact capable of negating the yaksa's strength in exchange for land and protection for his people within the empire. Rao is initially reluctant, but agrees to the deal to help Malini and fight the yaksa. He accepts the artifact, determined to return with something valuable to aid in their survival. He prepares to negotiate with Ehsan on behalf of his empress. In Chapter 33, Priya, now in Hiranaprastha, walks through the city in her plain sari, greeted with reverence but burdened by the increasing rot spreading among the people. She meets Lord Chetan, who, despite his rot-ridden state, agrees to help her by gathering warriors, weapons, and support from highborn families. Priya also reassures him about his son Ashish, who is under her care. Later, Priya confides in Ruk, sharing her concerns over her responsibilities. She gives Ashish a good luck charm from his parents, but wrestles with whether it would cause him pain. Priya prepares for a journey to Srugna, where a yaksa is being reborn. She gathers a group explaining the dangerous deathless waters and offering them a chance to gain strength at a great personal cost. As they journey, Priya senses Srugani warriors ahead, and her group prepares for a confrontation. She orders them to act like prey to survive. In Chapter 34, Aravind, a young Srugani warrior, is assigned to patrol the border with Ahiranya. He is nervous about the dark and haunted forest, recalling the warnings of his mother. While on patrol, he spots a woman from Ahiranya, rot-riven and in need of help. Despite initial hesitation, he and his commander offer her assistance. However, the woman reveals her true nature as a yaksa, manipulating the surroundings and attacking Arvind's patrol. In the ensuing chaos, Aravind and his commander are captured. The yaksa, led by a masked man and the woman, interrogate them, but the commander sacrifices himself to save Aravind. The woman orders Aravind to run, and he escapes, fleeing into the forest, overwhelmed by fear and guilt. The chapter highlights Arvind's transformation from a naive soldier to a survivor of a deadly encounter. In Chapter 35, Priya assists Ruchi, a woman who has drunk the deathless waters, offering her strength while warning her that the power is temporary. Ruchi is eager to prove herself, but Priya remains wary of the water's toll. Priya then comforts Ganam, who struggles with guilt over the deaths of his family and the use of children in war. They use their magic to hide from Shrigani soldiers and rest for the night. Priya reflects on the uncertainty of survival, particularly after losing so many mask keepers, including Seema and Bhumika. As she watches over her group, grief overwhelms her, and she falls into a dreamlike vision. In it, Priya stands in the ruins of the imperial court, surrounded by paths calling to her. However, she senses Malini's presence in the water, realizing that Malini wants her dead. In chapter 36, Bhumika and Jivan are trapped in a village by rising floodwaters. Bhumika helps the villagers by providing care and organizing tasks. She learns that the village is mostly composed of women and children, with many suffering from rot. The head woman, Manjit, expresses suspicion towards Bhumika, noticing her lack of rot and questioning her origins. Bhumika admits to coming from Ahiranya and shares a partial truth about seeking the monastery for a way to reach the nameless god. Manjit reveals that the monastery is not welcoming to outsiders and suggests smaller ones for prayer. Bhumika offers to help the village by taking in Gulnar, a widow, and suggests the community adapt their traditions to survive the current crisis. The head woman agrees to consider it, though she prefers to make the decision herself, and Bhumika and Jivan prepare to leave when the floodwaters recede. In chapter 37, Malini confronts Priya in a dreamlike state, where Priya expresses her grief and the painful truth of their past actions. Priya admits to betraying Malini to save her, and despite their emotional connection, Malini's anger remains. Their feelings intensify in a moment of intimacy, where they share a tender kiss, but Malini wakes, disturbed by the physical manifestation of a black flower growing from her chest, a painful reminder of their bond. Later, Malini meets with King Lakshan of Shrugna, whose kingdom is ravaged by rot and fear. She offers him support and soldiers, but raises concerns about the treatment of the rot-riven people in his lands. Alone in her room, Malini discovers the flower is still growing on her chest. In a moment of grim determination, she tears it free, vowing to use this pain to her advantage as she prepares to face the challenges ahead. In chapter 38, Rao's arrival brings Malini much-needed relief as he presents the mysterious stone, which could be a key weapon against the threat facing them. He shares that the Kai, who controls the stone, demands land in exchange for it, but Malini plans to test the stone's effectiveness before negotiating further. During her time in Shrugna, Malini listens to reports on the kingdom's dire situation and struggles to manage the rot and the growing threat of the yaksa. In a royal audience, a young Shrugani warrior reports seeing Priya and others with magical abilities crossing the border into Sarugna, confirming Malini's suspicions. Malini immediately commands her forces to assist Sarugna and agrees to test the stone against this new threat. She orders Narayan to ensure that any captured magic users are kept alive for interrogation, seeking to understand the true power of Ahiranya and its forces. In chapter 39, the rain stops and Bhumika knows it's time to leave the village and return to the monastery. The villagers give her a kind farewell, offering her food despite their scarcity. As Bhumika and Jivan cross the forest, she senses the presence of watchers and is drawn into a strange vision after drinking a drop of water from one of them. The vision clarifies her knowledge. She had a daughter, not with Jivan, but with someone else. Bhumika senses a yaksa awakening beneath the forest, which will bring destruction to the village and beyond. She warns Manjit, the head woman, of the impending danger. The village is already showing signs of rot, and Bhumika believes they must leave and seek safety at the monastery, despite Manjit's doubts. Bhumika insists that survival depends on working together to face the looming threat. In chapter 40, Priya and her group move deeper into Shrugna, crossing paths with two hunters they capture. Priya senses a yaksa waking beneath the forest and follows its energy, leading her to a mysterious site with ancient fossilized wood pillars. As Priya attempts to awaken the yaksa, she is struck with pain and sees visions of Ganam fatally wounded. Realizing the danger to both him and herself, Priya moves quickly, creating a seeker's path to reach him. She finds Ganam alive but gravely injured. As Priya faces a group of Sakatan soldiers, one of them, Ramesh, recognizes her. The tension escalates, and despite Priya's threats, the soldiers refuse to release Ganam. In a desperate act, Priya calls on her magic and sacrifices her own humanity to gain control of the earth. The soldiers are buried, and Priya focuses on saving Ganam, managing to remove the dagger and stop his bleeding. In chapter 41, Priya and her warriors move through Shrugna, tracking the Yaksa's awakening. After Ganem is injured by a black stone weapon, Priya leads them to safety. As she senses the yaksa's power, she uncovers a hidden weapon, an object that can negate a yaksa's abilities. Priya decides to return to Ahiranya to confront the yaksa, but first she must deal with her new reality. The yaksa's influence grows stronger in her, and she is forced to confront the truth about herself and her connection with Maniara. Despite her growing power, Priya knows the cost of her transformation. She will lose her humanity. She struggles with this realization, understanding that the Ahiranya people will be sacrificed unless she finds a third path. In her dreams, she calls out to Malini, hoping for a way to save them both. In chapter 42, Malini hears of a battle with the Ahiranya and the loss of many Sakatan liegemen, including a close friend of Low Prince Ashutosh. Despite the weapon Rao brought her, only one liegeman survives, and he reports that the weapon works, though at a great cost. Priya's deadly actions during the battle are confirmed, and Malini learns the truth of Priya's power. Ashutosh expresses his grief, sharing how his men were like family, and he urges Malini to kill Priya before she kills them. Malini is torn, acknowledging her hatred and desire for Priya, but also her inability to kill her. Malini resolves to use the heart's shell not to kill Priya but to claim her, deciding that she must act in the best interest of Parijatdvipa, even if it means confronting her own emotions toward Priya. In chapter 43, Rao meets with Malini in the Shrigani Mahal, requesting to go to Alor to gain the support of powerful priests for her cause. Malini agrees, but insists that Seema remain with her to prove loyalty. Rao learns of Seema's grief over the deaths of her friends, including Ramesh, and her conflicted feelings toward Priya. Despite Seema's emotional turmoil, Rao tells her he must leave to seek guidance from the nameless god in a monastery, leaving Seema behind. She expresses her frustration, urging Rao to listen to his heart instead. Rao acknowledges he doesn't understand his own heart, but Seema insists he did when they almost froze together in the snow. Despite their conversation, Rao departs, and Seema is left behind, her heart unresolved. In chapter 44, Priya guides the creation of a path, leading Arali Ara through Shrugna, where they witness the rebirth of a yaksa, Tsira Ara. As Tsira rises from the soil, she recalls a long, empty sleep after fire, unsure of what she sacrificed for her return. Priya gently cradles Tsira, expressing that her rebirth is what matters now, embracing her with a love that echoes the strangeness and power of Maniara. Arali, while feeling the weight of Ashok's memories, experiences both grief and a strange, beautiful sense of hope. He realizes that as Tsira becomes more human, she will encounter emotions beyond her previous existence. In chapter 45, Malini meets with Lady Kutlug, who represents her people's desire for land in exchange for the heart shell. Kutlug refuses to reveal the location of the mine, but offers to provide the material whenever needed. Malini insists on a vow of loyalty to the throne in return, which Kutlug hesitantly agrees to. Afterward, Malini sends a message to Parijat about Shrugna's dire situation with the spreading rot. When a rider arrives with news of devastation, Malini feels helpless but offers food supplies and prayers for the dead. Alone in her tent later, Malini senses Priya's presence and dreams of her by a lake covered in blue lotuses. In the dream, they confront their shared past, with Priya questioning Malini's true feelings. Malini realizes that Priya is at Utpala Lake in Alor, and she must find her. In chapter 46, Rao encounters difficulties reaching the Nimisa monastery in Alor due to flooding and the spreading rot. After receiving a warm but cautious welcome, the head priest, Sundar, reveals that the monastery is under threat from the yaksa. Sundar shares his regret for turning away an Ahiranya woman who claimed to know how to destroy the yaksa. He admits that evil forces are targeting the monastery, and he asks Rao for help. Rao vows to protect the monastery using Heart's Shell, as it may be their only defense. While exploring the area, Rao is led to a hidden group of refugees, including a woman named Bhumika. When confronted, Rao is initially hostile, but eventually listens as Bhumika claims they share a purpose. She introduces herself, and the chapter ends with the revelation that time is running out before the yaksa arrives. In chapter 47, Priya struggles with the implications of Malini's weapon, which nullifies her powers. As the yaksa in Alor awakens, Priya takes the temple children up the Hirana to teach them courage, warning them of the dangers they'll face, including the yaksa. She also warns Rook to leave Ahiranya if possible, asking him to care for Padma. Priya, Ganam, and their group set out on a new path toward Ullr. They encounter abandoned villages ravaged by rot, and Priya fears the impending destruction the yaksa will bring. Priya secretly hides vials of deathless water for her followers, teaching Ganam how to make paths to protect them. Realizing the yaksa will ultimately win, Priya plans to leave, believing her departure is necessary to prevent their defeat. She binds Ganam to a tree, intending for him to appear loyal to the yaksa to protect him, breaking his arm in the process to buy him time. In Chapter 48, Varsha starts gathering information for the priest Mitul, providing seemingly trivial gossip from the Empress's court. Over time, she realizes how this information can be valuable in shifting the Empire's power dynamics. Varsha learns from Deepa, a highborn woman who serves at the border of Ahiranya. Deepa teaches her to understand the currents of power through careful observation and listening. While with Deepa, Varsha overhears a conversation between Lada and Deepa, where Lada reveals that land disputes with the Jagate may lead to war. This information excites Varsha, and she decides to send it to Dwarali with a bribe, intending to make her own allies. Varsha sees an opportunity to secure power for herself and her son, planning to act as regent when the Empress is gone, ensuring his safety and strengthening her position in the Empire. In Chapter 49, Priya arrives at Utpala Lake, feeling the presence of a yaksa stirring beneath the soil. The lake and surrounding caravanserai are eerily silent, and Priya wonders if Malini understood her dream. After waiting, Malini appears, and they confront each other. Priya senses something amiss. She can't feel Malini or her guards. Malini admits to being alone, stating she faced Chandra with only faith. Priya realizes that Malini may be her ally against herself, and they discuss their fates. Priya, despite the risk of death, refuses to die yet. As they draw closer, Priya defends herself with a wall of earth, but Malini overpowers her, using a gold necklace that constricts her magic, leaving Priya vulnerable. Surrounded by soldiers, Malini traps Priya, holding a blade to her throat, and Priya is forced to yield, agreeing to follow her. In Chapter 50, Bhumika and the villagers are led into the monastery by Prince Rao. As they approach, Bhumika senses the yaksa awakening beneath the earth. She shares her knowledge of how to kill the yaksa, but admits she can no longer act on it herself due to her sacrifice. In the monastery, Bhumika is revered by the priests, though Prince Rao remains skeptical of her powers. She asks him to lay down his stone dagger, and when he does, she feels nothing, indicating her power is gone. The head priest demands proof, and Bhumika warns of the yaksa's impending attack on the monastery. The priests, influenced by Rao's faith, begin to believe her. As the yaksa draws near, Bhumika makes a painful choice, drinking from a bowl of soul-imbued water that grants her knowledge to destroy the yaksa, though it comes with immense agony. She resolves to protect the villagers and the Ahiranya. In Chapter 51, Rao and his soldiers prepare for the yaksa's arrival at the monastery. Despite limited resources, they set up defenses using heart's shell weapons. As the yaksa emerges, its presence is terrifying, and it speaks to Bhumika, calling her kin. Despite initial terror, Rao and his men manage to wound the yaksa using heart's shell weapons, but it proves difficult to hold down. Bhumika directs them to call upon the nameless god, invoking a destructive ritual. Ishan, a young priest, sacrifices himself, channeling the nameless's power, and the yaksa is consumed by fire. The rot is vanquished, but Ishan dies in the process, leaving his body burned and unrecognizable. Bhumika explains that all magic demands sacrifice, and Rao realizes the burden now falls on him. He orders Bhumika's arrest despite her role in saving them, and plans to take her to the Empress. In Chapter 52, Priya is confined in a cart, bound by magical heart shell cuffs that prevent her from accessing her powers. She feels disconnected from the yaksa, who try to reach her, but she cannot communicate with them due to the stone's restraint. Over time, Priya's guards grow lax, allowing her to overhear them discussing the heart shell, a strange, powerful stone. The cart stops, and Priya is visited by Seema, alive and well. Though Priya is relieved to see her, Seema's smile is strained, and she confronts Priya about Ramesh's death, expressing anger and grief. Priya acknowledges her role in Ramesh's death and apologizes. Seema urges Priya to comply with the Empress, but Priya insists she will only speak directly to Malini. After their emotional exchange, Priya resolves to hold firm, knowing Seema's well-being is enough for now. In Chapter 53, Priya, confined in a comfortable prison, is left alone in her cell until Malini visits her at night. The two share an emotionally charged conversation. Priya, under the influence of Hart's shell cuffs, feels the absence of her powers, but continues to taunt Malini with sharp words. She sarcastically questions Malini's intentions with a poisoned drink, but ultimately drinks it without harm. Malini, holding back her anger, confronts Priya about her betrayal, accusing her of aligning with the yaksa. Priya, undeterred, reveals her knowledge of the yaksa and offers to help Malini use the Hart's shell to destroy them. She reminds Malini that, despite the devastation the yaksa cause, both their peoples will suffer if they prevail. The two engage in a tense negotiation, with Priya demanding the survival of the Ahiranya people in exchange for her knowledge. Malini reluctantly agrees to the deal. In Chapter 54, Ganam returns from Alor without Priya, feeling guilty for failing to find her. The yaksa have become increasingly violent, and Ganam is their last twice-born. He secretly builds escape routes for Ahiranya people, guiding them through paths to safety. When Ruchi, a temple child, falls ill, Ganam tries to save her with the last vial of deathless water, but she dies. He struggles with the looming threat of the yaksa and prepares for the worst. He urges Rook to leave Ahiranya with Padma to survive, though Rook hesitates, unwilling to abandon the others. Ganam, weary and frustrated, resolves to dig out a hidden blade near the Bower of Bones, hoping it can hurt the yaksa and protect those still with him. Time is running out, and Ganam faces the growing pressure of keeping the children and others safe from the inevitable threat of the yaksa. In Chapter 55, Malini receives a letter from Lady Varsha to Lady Razia, which causes tension. Razia arrives in person, dressed in heavy Dwarali clothing, and demands answers about Malini's dealings with the Jagatai. Malini reassures Razia, explaining the necessity of granting land to the Jagatai and promising their loyalty, though Razia warns that the Jagatai cannot be trusted due to their lack of vows. Razia shares that Varsha has been plotting for her son's early claim to the throne, which she considers treason. Malini acknowledges Razia's concerns and is warned that future enemies may be more calculating. Razia reveals her loyalty to Malini's empire, but emphasizes the difficulty of walking a path where the empire must always come before those who have fought for her. She leaves, pledging continued loyalty through Khalil, while Malini faces the growing burden of leadership and the stakes of her decisions. In Chapter 56, Varsha, reflecting on her son Vijay's future, is visited by Empress Malini, who confronts her about betraying the empire. Malini reveals she knows about Varsha's communications with Lady Razia and a priest suspecting treason. Varsha denies it, but Malini accuses her of harboring ill will and being a traitor. Despite Varsha's pleas, Malini remains unmoved and accuses her of being like her late husband Chandra, using power without mercy. However, Malini shocks Varsha by assuring her that her son will not be taken away. Malini warns Varsha to either outsmart her or raise Vijay to be worthy of the throne, leaving her with a task to guide her son wisely. Malini's final words are a threat: betray her again and Varsha will not be spared. Varsha, still fearful, is left to contemplate her son's future under Malini's rule. In Chapter 57, Priya, imprisoned and left alone, faces growing frustration as Malini doesn't visit. New guards bring her food, and when forced to eat, Priya fights back violently, injuring one guard and escaping her chains briefly. She uses her magic to break free, but knows she cannot escape yet. While trapped, she threatens the guards, using their fear of Malini's wrath to stall. When more soldiers arrive, Sahar steps in, ordering the remaining guard to surrender his weapon. Sahar then signals for Malini to be called. Priya, bloodied but resolute, is left with a moment of victory but knows she's still not free. Her defiance proves she's not broken, but her survival hinges on carefully navigating the thin line between defiance and destruction under Malini's rule. In Chapter 58, Malini confronts two Sakadan soldiers who defied her orders, having been involved in a failed plot to kill Priya. After a tense exchange, Malini orders their execution to maintain control and prevent further betrayal. She also sends Lord Narayan to handle Prince Ashutosh, assuring him of her continued loyalty. Later, Malini visits Priya in her sick room, where Priya taunts her, suggesting Malini is becoming monstrous. Malini struggles with conflicting emotions towards Priya, wanting to kill her but also feeling drawn to her. During the visit, Malini tends to Priya's wounds, but is visibly shaken by her own actions. Priya mocks Malini's internal struggle, calling her a liar and questioning her motivations. Malini leaves, consumed by disgust, but also conflicted by her feelings for Priya, realizing that her emotions and actions are no longer under her control. In Chapter 59, Priya, having regained some control over her magic, steals a key from a guard while pretending to be weak and wounded. With the key, she frees herself from the heart's shell cuffs, feeling a brief sense of independence. Despite her freedom, disappointment lingers as the heart's shell, which had promised hope, proves insufficient against the yaksa. Priya reflects on her complex emotions toward Malini, whose hands on her body stirred both longing and pain. She decides not to leave yet, holding on to the hope that her own power, not the heart's shell, could be used against the yaksa. With a renewed determination, Priya plans to escape the sick room, relying on her physical skills and magic to silently subdue the guards. She is determined to prove her value to Malini, refusing to return to her cell and seeking a way to use her strength to fight back. In Chapter 60, Malini wakes to find Priya in her room standing by the window with a knife. Priya reveals she has freed herself from the heart's shell cuffs and restrained Malini's guards. Despite the tension, Priya expresses a desire to negotiate, not escape. She moves toward Malini but still carries a knife, which Malini insists she put down. When Priya hesitates, Malini attempts to strike, but Priya overpowers her, disarming her. The two engage in a brief struggle, and Priya flees the room. Malini pursues, feeling the magic binding her to Priya. Priya escapes through a window, and Malini follows, landing softly in the gardens. The two face each other, and Priya warns Malini she's not trying to fight. However, Malini uses magic to bind Priya with green stems, and the moment ends with Priya softly calling her name, Malini. In Chapter 61, Priya is trapped by magical flower stems, but Malini's power weakens, and Priya persuades her to release the binds. Malini, still shaken, questions Priya about the yaksa and the dark power in her mind. Priya explains that Maniara, a powerful yaksa, has been controlling her, using her strength for her own plans. Priya admits that Maniara wants to merge with her to walk the world and destroy everything. Despite their shared history and emotions, Priya urges Malini to fight the yaksa. Malini, understanding the gravity of the situation, realizes they are linked in ways she hadn't anticipated. Priya reveals she is a valuable weapon, but Malini acknowledges her own mistakes. As they confront the magnitude of their situation, Malini decides to free Priya from the heart's shell and her imprisonment, choosing to work together moving forward, despite the complexity of their bond. In Chapter 62, Rao escorts Bhumika and the priests heading toward Parijat. Bhumika expresses concern over the power she has given to kill the yaksa, fearing it may lead to destruction beyond their control, particularly for Ahiranya. She demands that Malini promise the safety of her people before she shares the full knowledge to permanently destroy the yaksa. Upon arriving at the Mahal, Rao learns of Priya's capture and Malini's tense state. He conveys Bhumika's request to Malini, who is conflicted. As tensions rise, Rao acknowledges his loyalty to Parijatdvipa, but Seema confronts him, expressing her anger and disappointment. She challenges him to make his own choices rather than following what is expected of him. In a vulnerable moment, Rao admits that his heart feels dead, burdened by the loss of those he loved. Seema urges him to avoid inflicting the same fate on her, leading to a poignant moment of reckoning. In Chapter 63, Priya is freed from her cell and no longer wears the heart's shell. Sahar guards her, though their interactions are tense. Priya is brought to a prison cell where she is reunited with Bhumika, but Bhumika has lost her memories. Despite this, Bhumika shares vital knowledge about how to permanently destroy the yaksa, revealing the true source of their strength, the Hirana. Priya vows to negotiate with Malini, promising to help her defeat the yaksa in exchange for the safety of Ahiranya's people. After a confrontation with Rao, who reassures her about Bhumika's safety, Priya meets with Malini, who agrees to her terms, pledging to spare Ahiranya. Malini admits that she no longer wishes to harm Priya and agrees to a contract for knowledge in exchange for safety. Priya promises to help win the war, committing to the pact. In Chapter 64, Malini gathers her court to announce a path forward, detailing the sacrifice required to destroy the yaksa permanently. She explains that Elder Priya will guide priests to the deathless waters to burn them away. Though some doubt the plan, Malini is resolute. A confrontation with High Priest Hemanth follows, where he accuses her of turning away from her vow to burn for Parijatdvipa's survival. Malini counters, asserting that she will not be a sacrificial pawn and will save the empire by destroying the yaksa, even if it costs her the priesthood's support. Hemanth is allowed to fade into obscurity, and Malini's control over the priesthood strengthens. 5 priests volunteer to die in the ritual to save the Empire, showing their loyalty to Malini's vision. Malini's resolve solidifies as she watches Hemanth's power crumble, knowing her plan is now set in motion. In Chapter 65, Sanvi visits the prison where Priest Mitul is being held, severely tortured for betraying the High Priest. He confesses he told the Empress everything, except about Sanvi. She comforts him, promising the High Priest's safety and swears to lead the Empress to the Mothers. After he dies in her arms, Sanvi prepares for her own fate, reflecting on her duty. The Empress is gearing up for war, and Sanvi, driven by loyalty and faith, continues her work despite the turmoil. Sahar complains about guarding an Ahiranya man whom Elder Bhumika seems concerned about. Sanvi, leaving behind the city of Harsinghar and the memories of Mitul, resolves to never return. The chapter shows her resolve to serve the Empire and burn, sacrificing everything for the greater cause, even as she grieves the loss of Mitul and the life she once knew. In Chapter 66, Priya, Bhumika, and Seema travel in a chariot under the watch of Malini's soldiers. Priya offers to help Bhumika remember their shared past, but Bhumika refuses. They discuss the safety of their people, with Seema reassuring Bhumika about Jivan's well-being. Later, Lata warns Priya that the Empress wants her with her, and Priya enters Malini's tent. While touching Malini's belongings, Priya finds letters written to her by Malini which lead to a heartfelt conversation. They confess their feelings, with Malini admitting she loved Priya but lost her trust. Priya offers her vow in the form of a garland of flowers, and they share an intense, intimate moment. As the night ends, Malini promises to keep Priya safe, while Priya feels the weight of her future and the complexities of their relationship. In Chapter 67, Ahiranya grapples with the consequences of the yaksa's transformation, as they have taken on human features and mortal decay after sacrificing much of their green magic. He tends to Taruara, who is weakening from the wounds inflicted by their return. Ahiranya, filled with panic, searches for the temple children, feeling a deep urgency to create more vessels for his kin. Upon finding the children, Ashish warns them to run, but they are quickly captured. Ahiranya confronts Ganam, who refuses to cooperate, expressing his grief over the children's fate and the looming invasion of Parijatdvipa. Ahiranya, filled with rage, contemplates killing Rook as punishment for defying orders. However, a group of Parijatdvipan loyalists offers to fight for the yaksa in exchange for immortality, sparing the children for now. Ahiranya agrees to their offer. In Chapter 68, Malini faces the painful truth that Priya, now entwined with the yaksa, may need to die to ensure the destruction of the deathless waters. Malini wrestles with her love for Priya, knowing that Priya's sacrifice might be the key to ending the yaksa's curse. Malini seeks answers from Bhumika, who confirms that Priya is both part of and a key to the yaksa's destruction. Malini, despite her growing despair, resolves to go with Priya into Ahiranya, determined to protect her. Rao and Lata try to dissuade her, warning that her decision might jeopardize her legacy and life, but Malini insists on her choice, refusing to let Priya go alone. She commands that they stay behind, asserting her authority as Empress. In the end, Malini resolves to face whatever comes, promising to return, even as grief and fear weigh heavily on her. In Chapter 69, Priya prepares for her final journey to Ahiranya, knowing that she must lead Malini's priests to the deathless waters and allow them to destroy the yaksa. Before leaving, she speaks to Jivan, entrusting him with a key to free Bhumika and keep her safe. Priya shares a tearful farewell with Seema, urging her not to follow. When she meets Malini, they confront the reality of Priya's fate. Priya must die for the yaksa to be destroyed, but Malini refuses to accept it. Malini vows to die alongside Priya if it comes to that, rejecting the fate foretold by prophecy. Together, they decide to destroy the deathless waters, defy destiny, and survive. Their resolve strengthens as they walk toward the forest, with Priya parting the trees to lead them into Ahiranya. Despite the risks, they move forward, determined to fight for their future. In Chapter 70, Malini and Priya journey through Ahiranya, with Malini feeling Priya's protective magic. As they walk, Priya senses a presence in the trees, and soon a figure named Shyam emerges, revealing he has consumed the deathless waters to protect the children. He pleads for Priya to return, but she refuses. Shyam attacks, summoning thorns to block their path, and Priya remains unmoved by the threat. As Ahiranya warriors with magic and scythes attack, Malini fights, using her magic to defend herself and Priya. She kills Sham, believing he would harm Priya, but Priya is devastated by the loss. Malini urges Priya to continue toward the Harrowing, where they must face the yaksa. Despite the danger, Priya affirms her resolve, and together they prepare to face the upcoming battle, with Malini at her side, ready to fight. In Chapter 71, Bhumika feels grief over the impending death of Priya, though she doesn't fully know her. She struggles with the idea of Ahiranya and Priya's fate, realizing she must act. When Jivan arrives, they quickly prepare to leave, heading to Ahiranya despite the dangers. Bhumika expresses her deep emotions to Jivan, revealing her gratitude for their bond despite everything lost. The two share a heartfelt moment, acknowledging their connection. They meet Seema, who has stolen horses for their journey. The trio heads toward the forest where the path is treacherous. Despite her inability to carve a safe path, Bhumika's magic connects with the forest and she leads them in. The trees part, and they enter Ahiranya, determined to protect Priya and ensure her safety. In Chapter 72, Rao stands with the generals at the border of Parijatdvipa, waiting in eerie silence. Tensions rise as they prepare for war, and the arrival of Hemant, the high priest, brings complications. Hemant, with a group of priests, reveals his intentions to place Prince Vijay on the throne and end Malini's rule, stating that her death is necessary to destroy the yaksa. Rao defies Hemant, remembering Aditya's sacrifice, and vows not to betray Malini. As Hemant's followers transform into beings of fire, the Parijatdvipan army faces a deadly onslaught of flames. Hemant's prophecy unfolds as the priests unleash their fiery wrath, threatening to consume the army. Rao and the generals must confront the impending destruction, while Malini's fate and the future of the empire hang in the balance. In Chapter 73, Priya and Malini walk through the trees of Ahiranya, facing the coming confrontation with the yaksa. Priya steps forward to confront Sira Ara, a yaksa reborn with human traits. As the yaksa advances, Priya holds off her followers, determined to face her alone. Sira Ara, despite being a yaksa, is more human than expected, still fearing the rot. As fire erupts around them, Malini urges Priya to guide them to safety, but the fire spreads quickly. Priya uses her magic to carve paths for their escape, but the fire follows relentlessly. In a final act of self-sacrifice, Priya throws herself in front of Malini, absorbing the flames meant for her. Malini's grief and horror overwhelm her as she holds Priya, who is critically burned. As Priya loses consciousness, she whispers to Malini, denying the belief that Malini was meant for the fire. In Chapter 74, Ahiranya is burning, and Taru Ara struggles with her humanity, feeling the pain of her wound and transformation. Arali Ara, witnessing her decay, reflects on the loss of their kin, including Sira Ara's death. Bisa Ara, also suffering from the mortal transformation, accuses Arali of their downfall, blaming the release of Bhumika. Arali, intent on saving Priya, leaves to find her in the burning Mahal, encountering Ganam and Rukh. He forces them to the Hirana for safety, warning them against fleeing. He then meets Bhumika, who has returned to protect her people and child. Despite the destruction, she remains hopeful. Arali reveals that he gave Bhumika the knowledge to end their lives, and the fire will consume Ahiranya. Bhumika, determined to lead her people to safety, takes Arali's hand, ready to face the consequences of their actions together. In Chapter 75, Malini carries an unconscious Priya, who has been burned by fire. As they move, Sahara is gravely injured, and Sanvi, betraying Malini, reveals her intention to sacrifice her. Sanvi threatens Malini with fire, but Malini defends herself, trapping Sanvi in the ground and stopping the fire for now. Priya, weak but awake, urges Malini to reach the Hirana, where the deathless waters could heal her. Malini, realizing her mistakes, decides to carry Priya there herself. She is determined that the waters will heal Priya and vows to destroy them once Priya is safe. The fire pursues them, but Malini uses her magic and Priya's strength to carve a path. At the Hirana, Malini enters the water with Priya, promising to destroy the waters to prevent the yaksa's influence. Priya warns her of the potential danger if Maniara takes her form, but Malini assures her she will recognize Priya and destroy Maniara if needed. In Chapter 76, Bhumika climbs the Hirana with the yaksa and notices their growing human traits. She meets Araliara, who reveals their true names and intentions. Bhumika expresses her desire to lead her people to safety, while the yaksa and their kin speak of their unwillingness to burn. Araliara offers Bhumika the chance to regain her true self, but she refuses, asserting that the yaksa must die for Ahiranya's survival. Bhumika is reunited with her daughter, and in the moment of wonder, she faces the reality of her choice. Araliara urges her to join the yaksa, but Bhumika remains resolute. When Sendil advances threateningly, Seema intervenes, stabbing him with a heart-shell knife, fatally wounding him. Bhumika tells Araliara to leave the Hirana and face his fate, knowing it's the only choice for both him and Ahiranya. In Chapter 77, chaos ensues as fire spreads and the army begins fighting itself. Hemant manages to escape on horseback, prompting Rao to send Narayan and his men after him. Mahesh, wounded, warns of the chaos but is consumed by fire before Rao's eyes. Lada is sent away to the war camp for safety while Khalil and Rao pursue Hemant. They fight their way through the flames, with Khalil shooting down Hemant's soldiers. They encounter a weapon, a spear tipped with Chandra's fire, which Rao realizes is being used by Hemant. As Rao charges at Hemant, he is struck by the spear's fire, leaving him injured. Despite his pain, Rao confronts Hemant, but his broken leg slows him. Hemant's weapon and reach overpower Rao, and he is knocked unconscious. In Chapter 78, Araliara and his kin, wounded and weary, face the growing threat of fire. As the flames rise, Arali pleads with Vata Ara and Taru Ara to accept death to spare the mortals. Taru, weakened and humanized by mortal blood, warns of their permanent death if they continue to hold on to their flesh. Despite their pain, Arali believes that sacrificing themselves will give their death meaning, as it may spare those who remain of their kind. After a tense silence, Bisa Ara agrees to join him and Vata Ara in accepting their fate. Arali carries Taru toward the Hirana, hoping to escape the fire, and with a final act, he places his hand on Bhumika's throat, offering her the chance to live and grieve. They all make their way down the Hirana, accepting the peace that comes with surrendering to death. In Chapter 79, Priya sinks into the deathless waters and finds herself in the Sangam, face to face with Maniara, who now possesses Priya's own face. Maniara, a being of starlight and fire, reveals that her kin was destroyed by mortals who followed them and killed them again with human faith. She confesses that she used the sacrifices of temple children to return, and now, after losing her kin, she hungers for both life and death. Priya recognizes that Maniara's prolonged existence in the mortal world has caused the destruction of both their kin and the world. Maniara refuses to let go, believing that she can reshape the world even if alone. Priya, realizing her failure, attempts to close the doorway between them, but Maniara's grip tightens and the horrifying consequences unfold. In Chapter 80, Malini waits in the water, devastated by the loss of Priya, who has vanished into the depths. She fears that Priya may return as a stranger controlled by Maniara or not return at all. As the fire closes in, Malini contemplates her own role in bringing this destruction. She reflects on her fractured faith, realizing that she believes in Priya's humanity, her broken, mortal self, and is willing to accept all aspects of her. In a moment of clarity, Malini steps into the water, despite knowing it could be poison. She resolves to reach Priya once more, knowing the fire will follow her path. As Malini enters the water, she embraces the sacrifice, hoping for one last connection with Priya, even if it means her own end. In Chapter 81, Bhumika, struggling with grief and the weight of loss, lies on the ground as the deathless waters overtake her. She is overwhelmed by memories of her temple siblings, including Ashok, and the ghostly voices of those lost. As she enters the Sangam, she encounters Priya, who is struggling with her identity as a yaksa. Priya, conflicted and bound by her new powers, prepares to destroy the deathless waters to prevent further harm. Bhumika tries to reach her, urging her to stop, but Priya's desire to fight for her kin pushes her forward. The two share a moment of connection before Priya commits to her path. Meanwhile, Bhumika, now fully reconnected with her own humanity, prepares to guide the others to safety. As the Hirana crumbles, they make their way down, evading fire and disaster, with Bhumika's resolve growing stronger. In Chapter 82, Rao wakes in a dark, formless space, confronted by the ghostly presence of Aditya. Aditya, calm and serene, speaks of the strength of the earth, the truth behind heart's shell, and the emptiness that is a gift, not a curse. As Aditya fades, he urges Rao to live and carve his own fate. Back in his own body, Rao finds the heart's shell dagger in his hand as Hemant raises a fire-speared weapon to strike him. Using the dagger, Rao blocks the attack, pins Hemanth down, and prepares to kill him. Rao confronts Hemanth, explaining he's killing him not out of justice, but because Hemanth deserves to die and the world will be better without him. Rao kills Hemanth, ending the priest's life as Hemanth dies in agony, and Rao remains resolute in his choice. In Chapter 83, Priya is overwhelmed by Maniara's influence, struggling with the loss of her kin and her human life. Maniara, consumed by grief and rage, seeks to tear the world apart for the death of her kin. However, the human side of Priya remains, and she is drawn to Malini's presence, symbolized by golden light. Despite the destruction around her, Priya reaches for the humanity that connects her to Malini. In a final act of defiance, Priya destroys the Sangam, reducing its power to just enough to preserve her love for Malini and the world. She wakes in her own body, carrying Malini in her arms, both now bound by the power of their love. As the Harranya opens, Priya promises to return to Malini, then allows the collapsing Harranya to close over her, sealing her fate. In Chapter 84, Rao struggles through the woods on makeshift crutches, finding Sahar near the Harranya, gravely wounded but still alive. She tells him she waited for Malini, who had escaped the temple, and that the yaksa are gone. When Rao asks if Priya was with Malini, Sahar confirms she is gone. Despite Sahar's condition, she insists Rao protect Malini first. When Rao finds Malini alive, unburned, and unconscious on a bed of black flowers, he realizes she has transformed, emerging unharmed from the flames. He assures Sahar that Malini is now a living goddess and mother of flame who saved them all. Sahar, though in pain, agrees to spread this truth when she survives. This marks a pivotal moment in the story where Malini's survival and transformation into a powerful divine figure is solidified. In Chapter 85, Malini wakes alone after the destruction of the Ahiranya, learning from Lada that there is no trace of Priya or the yaksa. Malini clings to the belief that Priya is not dead. She plans to meet with Elder Bhumika to honor their agreement, promising the safety of Ahiranya. As she lies in her sickbed, Malini contemplates her future as a powerful empress, yet lonely and without Priya. Weeks pass before she dreams of Priya, feeling her presence even as the yaksa are gone. In her dream, Priya confirms she is not just a yaksa, but still with her. Malini wakes, feeling tired and mortal, but finds a black flower blooming at her chest, a symbol of a promise, suggesting that Priya is still connected to her. The chapter emphasizes Malini's grief, loneliness, and the unresolved bond with Priya. In Chapter 86, Bhumika's magic is gone, and she struggles with the loss of Priya, feeling powerless and disconnected from the Sangam. She knows that the destruction of the Ahiranya has left nothing, not even the deathless waters. Malini, seeking a way forward, asks Bhumika to ensure the safety of the children, entrusting Padma to Jivan. They share a quiet, unspoken understanding before Jivan leaves. Bhumika then meets with Malini in an opulent tent. Malini acknowledges Bhumika's role in the downfall of the yaksa and proposes a vow of loyalty, but Bhumika refuses, stating that she will not sacrifice Ahiranya's soul. Malini, understanding, decides not to force her. She offers Bhumika freedom and promises that Ahiranya's future will be shaped by its own path. Malini commits to ruling with strength, and the bond between them is defined by mutual respect rather than control. In Chapter 87, Malini addresses a jubilant crowd in Harsinghar, declaring peace with the Ahiranya, who helped win the war. Despite the celebrations, Rao finds Seema on the roof, where she expresses grief over Priya's death. Seema shares her desire to leave Ahiranya and Parijatdvipa, seeking an escape. Rao, reflecting on his own desire for freedom, contemplates a life beyond Dwarali and the Lalchila, away from the past and the expectations tied to his position. He talks about watching Kai Esan to ensure peace in the future, but dreams of a new world beyond his current life. Seema, too, decides to join him once things stabilize. Malini, recognizing Rao's struggle with his fate, offers him the freedom to leave. Rao, grateful, thanks her, and later, Lada hugs him, expressing her sorrow. Rao promises to venture into the world and share his journey with her. In Chapter 88, Vijay, the 15-year-old crown prince, approaches Empress Malini in her gardens on his birthday. He talks about his training and his interest in ships rather than swords, revealing his desire to explore the world. The Empress humorously reminds him that his mother warned him to fear her, but Vijay, now maturing, dismisses this. He reflects on stories he's heard about her adventures and kindness from advisors, particularly Lady Deepa, who let him enjoy sweets when he was younger. Vijay, seeking approval, tells Malini he's no longer a child, but she disagrees, stating he's still a boy. She offers him advice, suggesting that when she's gone, he'll need to learn to lie and wear many masks to survive, a hint of her own awareness of her impermanence. Despite his protests, she insists he doesn't yet have the heart to rule. In Chapter 89, Malini reflects on her life, knowing Priya is gone. She vows to ensure Ahiranya's safety and makes a deal with Bhumika, promising to rule the empire well. Though she has immense power, Malini grows weary and decides to leave before the monsoon. She knows she is no longer entirely human, having changed in the waters and with Priya's power. She travels to Shrugna, then to Ahiranya's forest, where she feels the forest's magic calling her home. While reflecting, she hears Priya's voice, who apologizes for leaving her and expresses gratitude for Malini's help. Priya confesses her love, and Malini, despite her fear, promises to garland her. When she turns to face Priya, they reunite, signaling the beginning of a new chapter filled with love and understanding. Malini has found what she truly sought, connection after all the loss. Epilogue. Padma informs Bhumika of a new river cutting through the forest and a woman asking for her. Bhumika, reflecting on the past and the changes Ahiranya has gone through, expects nothing unusual as she heads to the Bower of Bones. There she sees a woman made of flowers and leaves and fears the return of the yaksa curse. However, the woman transforms into Priya, who has returned to Bhumika. Priya explains she is not a yaksa but still holds some power from the once born, and though the rot in Ahiranya isn't fading, she's working to make it better. Priya and Bhumika embrace, sharing an emotional reunion. Priya shares her plans to travel the world with someone she loves and gives Bhumika messages for their loved ones. After Priya vanishes, Bhumika, filled with grief and joy, sits in the grass, comforted by her family's presence.